The old family home's library had always been my refuge, a sanctuary among shelves overflowing with volumes that chronicled centuries of our history. On that rainy afternoon, as raindrops drummed against the roof, I reviewed the property documents, expecting pristine order. A meticulous lawyer specializing in inheritance law, I had a trained eye for any inaccuracy, any hint of fraud, and that day, a detail startled me. Among the papers, a sales contract caught my attention. The signature seemed authentic, but the date was out of place. November 14th, 5 years prior, inconsistent with other records. My experience told me something was amiss. The handwriting, though familiar, exhibited strokes that didn't quite match what I knew of my cousin Charles Carter's signatures, a man the family trusted to manage our assets. Contracts may be broken, but justice has a long memory. The phrase rang clearly in my mind, a mantra underpinning my career. Now, it felt like a personal summons, disappointment mingled with unwavering resolve. My blood, usually synonymous with trust, seemed to harbor a treacherous shadow. I took a deep breath, striving to control the whirlwind of emotions. "My name is Laura Carter," I wrote mentally, feeling the weight of the moment. "I am 46 years old. I am a lawyer specializing in inheritance law. My life is interpreting contracts, detecting hidden flaws, improving vision where everyone sees only paper." I knew this wasn't just a professional case. It was a fight for the family's honor, for our roots. If left unchecked, this forged contract could steal a legacy built through generations of hard work. The clock seemed to slow as I scanned the pages again, searching for every clue that could unlock the truth. The library's shadows, blended with the steady sound of rain, made the atmosphere almost sacred to my quest. There, surrounded by ancient volumes and heavy silence, I decided I wouldn't allow this stain to remain hidden. My mission was clear: to unravel the fraud, to bring to light what was concealed. Because, however much they break contracts, justice remembers those who pursue it with determination. I began there, on that quiet afternoon, the first step of a battle that would forever change everything we believed about loyalty, property, and trust. The family's history was written there, and I would be the guardian of this hidden truth. Family lunches used to be filled with laughter and stories, but looking back now, I realize how many subtle signs I chose to ignore. Charles always had such a self-assured, almost overbearing manner when discussing the family's assets. He seemed to believe that total control was his birthright, and he never hid his eagerness for quick liquidity for personal investments, always disguised with optimistic phrases and grandiose plans. I, methodical and observant, perhaps allowed familiar affability to obscure what was, in fact, boundless ambition. I remember countless dinners where his wife, Fernanda, always so elegant and reserved, offered gifts with a smile that, I now understand, held a hint of veiled irony. Fernanda, when our meetings were still frequent, expressed her desire for social ascension through the easy money Charles sought. The glint in her eyes wasn't mere vanity, but an ambition that compromised bonds. In our casual conversations, she seemed to hold secrets, whispering charms that deflected deeper scrutiny. It was a subtle dance, where gifts were offered, but shadows were also planted. I met Julia in law school, a classmate who always silently competed with me. She was intelligent and ruthless, but harbored a subtle resentment, perhaps for the professional trajectory I followed with more prominence. In a way, she had a cynical view of family ties, that old adage that inheritances are wild cards in complex and dirty legal games. In our few recent conversations, Julia made almost veiled insinuations about how contracts could be manipulated, and that she would be more than willing to prove her technical superiority at any cost. It was strange to see how these pieces now fit together in my mind, forming a picture that previously seemed too distant to see. At family lunches, episodes that previously seemed isolated, like an almost aggressive insistence on the part of Charles that I leave the administration of the assets to him, made me feel a slight discomfort, ignored by routine. But, revisiting these moments, everything now had weight, as if a veil were lifted to reveal what should have been obvious. Fernanda, with her calculated gestures and excessive elegance, silently triangulated with Charles. It was the complicity of a couple who, disguised as family allies, harbored a fervent greed, and Julia, separately, worked behind the scenes, preparing the legal means to mask the transactions and legitimize what was nothing more than fraud. Everything seemed part of a carefully orchestrated plan, where each player knew their role, and few details escaped control. I recall one specific afternoon, when Charles called me to discuss an urgent supposed investment that needed the quick liquidation of some properties. His confident posture tried to convince me, almost persuade me to give in, claiming that I exaggerated in legal formalities. Fernanda in the same room, silent, but with a sharp gaze and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. After that conversation, I began to realize that the coldness they emanated wasn't just business strategy. There was a profound disregard for legality, a certainty that they could manipulate the truth with impunity. It was the same legal expertise that I mastered that they despised. Me, dedicated to protecting the family's heritage and memories. Them, committed to betraying it all. My specialty in the precise analysis of complex contracts showed me that it wasn't just a diversion. It was a systemic articulation to steal, to erase our history through false writing. The dinners, the social gatherings where we smiled, the superficial conversations amongst family members were, beneath the surface, springboards to greed. Fernanda's subtle irony masked her relentless thirst for easy money. Charles's coldness concealed his plan to leave a legacy of losses. And Julia, with her veiled resentment, seemed to want to prove something bigger. That technical skill could suffocate blood ties and justice. And I wondered, how many times had I hesitated to see the truth? Perhaps because looking deeply into it meant accepting betrayal from so close, from my own flesh and blood. Perhaps because, as a lawyer and specialist, I knew that to achieve justice, one needed not only courage, but also preparation. Today, as I revisit these memories, I recognize in them more than nostalgia. I see the signs of a plan I should have dismantled. And so, returning to family lunches and dinners wasn't just a remembrance of the past, but the fuel for my unwavering decision to fight what was wrong. Because, ultimately, nothing is lost if justice remains vigilant. I knew I needed to go beyond what my eyes could see in these gatherings. I needed to use all the knowledge I had acquired throughout my life. From college, from classes with experienced masters, from analyzing contracts for clients that never let me relax, to unravel what was happening in the shadows of these relationships. The shadow of deceit wasn't just in the ink of the forged document I had found, but in the very essence of this group I considered family. To beat them, I would have to be as cold and calculating, but above all, more intelligent and perceptive. My search was only just beginning. The following nights were consumed by a frenetic pace of research and private consultations. I knew that each step needed to be taken cautiously, as I was facing not only document fraud, but a web of interests that extended firmly around the family. I began, then, to meticulously analyze the property records in the county courthouse files, where public documents should be organized with maximum transparency. However, I soon realized that the presented documentation contained subtle inconsistencies, the fruits of Charles and his accomplices' clandestine manipulations, a cold game of switched dates, digitized signatures, and altered copies. To avoid arousing suspicion, I kept my investigations secret. I didn't name names. I confined myself to describing facts, delicately, to a few trusted lawyer colleagues and a former professor who had always served as a mentor. With him, discreet conversations revealed advanced techniques of auditing and document forensics that I had never applied to family cases. It was with his help that I began to access detailed audit reports, confidential documents that allowed me to track changes in official records, indispensable tools for unveiling the fraud. The path, however, was not simple. The registry offices resisted providing essential information. Under the guise of bureaucracy, something or someone was working to hinder access, fueling the suspicion of a network of favors. Each request entered a waiting queue to appear natural, which they used to block my investigative action. In those moments, the memory of the recurring phrase always returned to my mind. Contracts may be broken, but justice has a long memory. That's what I needed to remember. That patience and persistence would be the instruments to unravel that tangled thread. With the professor's help, I learned to apply digital scans to the digitized documents, focusing on their metadata. It was fascinating and terrifying to see that the last signatures had been digitally inserted at times when I was provably not present. The digital forensics revealed rigorous patterns of fraud in multiple contracts, showing that the forgery was not an isolated act, but a modus operandi established in recent years. I knew that Charles and Fernanda were beginning to notice my frequent trips to public hearings and visits to the registry offices. Despite their suspicious glances, I didn't let slip a single gesture that would betray my investigations. I mastered my emotions with discipline and absolute control. My sharp mind operated in cold, rational equilibrium. They might sense a threat, but they would never guess the extent of what was to come. With each new document discovered, I carefully organized the evidence, cataloging everything in encrypted folders on my computer, which I protected with robust encryption. Thus, digital media and handwritten notes coexisted in a meticulous archive, ready to be presented to the justice system when the time was right. Years of betrayal exposed to the bright light of technical knowledge. The family gatherings continued, although more sporadically. On one of these occasions, Charles's calculated coldness became almost palpable, and Fernanda displayed a smile that didn't reach her eyes, a silence that screamed distrust. I, in turn, maintained the facade of normality, like a sphinx that fell silent around the suspicions. This silent battle strengthened my conviction. It wouldn't just be chance that would remove them from power. In those days, I also noticed Julia's insidious role in that machine. A former friend, who, as a hired lawyer, worked to disguise the dubious transactions. Her arrogance was palpable. She made a point of demonstrating intellectual superiority, but she ignored that my determination grew with each step. If she wanted to prove something, she would be defeated by the relentless efficiency of the legal method, and not by a game of egos. If at first weakness intimidated me, now I saw resilience as a greater strength. Justice, which before was only an ideal, had become a concrete call, demanding of me not only technical ability, but the courage to confront those who had placed their trust in my hands and then betrayed it. Perhaps aware that I was approaching the truth, they began to cast shadows of doubt on my professional circle, trying to bury my reputation. But my results, analyses, and technical ability spoke louder than whispers of intrigue. I was, at that moment, at the exact point from which the investigation would deepen, the plot would slowly unfold, and the fraudulent past of those who wished to erase the history of our family would assert itself with unquestionable evidence. And so, step by step, line by line, contract by contract, the truth I had sworn to defend began to emerge in its rawest and truest form, indestructible and irrefutable. As the weeks unfolded, the tangled web of fraud surrounding the family's properties unraveled before my eyes with terrifying clarity. The altered contract, initially assessed as an isolated incident, proved to be merely the surface of a complex and carefully orchestrated network. Using a rigorous combination of traditional document analysis methods and the latest digital forensic tools, I began to map a sequence of systematic manipulations that spanned years of our family and legal relationships. The forged digital signature, which had triggered my first alert, was only the beginning of a series of far more extensive inconsistencies. Documents that should have reflected the precise chronology of transactions were altered. Incompatible dates, times that proved my absence, conflicting versions, and digital versions whose metadata revealed illicit alterations. Each file bore invisible marks to the inattentive, but clear to those who, like me, knew how to interpret them as clues to a crime coldly planned by my own relatives. Charles and Fernanda, accustomed to masking their actions under a veneer of normalcy, began to show signs of unease. Quick message exchanges using codes and euphemisms indicated that my actions were shaking the foundations of their scheme. Having been alerted, I learned, through a discreet contact in the legal field, of maneuvers to transfer some of the assets to offshore accounts, a clear attempt at asset protection that would hinder tracking and recovery. Even faced with these veiled threats, I maintained my composure. To bring down such a deeply rooted structure, I knew that only with coolness, precision, and resilience could I move forward. I expanded my network of contacts, cultivating the trust of former courthouse employees and even people connected to parallel record-keeping systems, who sometimes, outside the law, possessed valuable information about alterations in the official records. In these private meetings, often in little-frequented cafes or in the familiar hallways of the college where I taught years ago, I obtained accounts that confirmed the date tampering, a precise forgery operation to erase the genuine course of the inheritance. During family gatherings, which were becoming more tense and sparse, the tension was almost palpable. On one such occasion, I observed Charles's stiff demeanor. He avoided my gaze and responded in a curt, uncomfortable manner to the most trivial questions. Fernanda maintained a controlled smile, a mask that couldn't hide her growing discomfort. The atmosphere, once cordial, seemed to anticipate an imminent confrontation. Julia, the lawyer who, with her arrogance and coldness, orchestrated the legal cover-up of the scheme, insisted on displaying an almost insolent confidence, as if she underestimated my investigations and doubted my technical ability. However, I knew that her biggest mistake was underestimating the power of truth when supported by the relentless technique of forensic science. This wasn't a personal clash, but a fight for respect for the law and the history of our family. I then decided it was time to formalize my plan of action. More than just compiling evidence, I needed to build an organized, robust, and technical dossier capable of convincing the courts and revealing the full extent of the fraud. Every element obtained was carefully cataloged, reviewed, and protected by encryption to ensure its inviolability and legitimize my complaint before any court. To further strengthen the impact of the issue, I began to make contacts with journalists specializing in legal fraud, those who knew how to analyze beyond superficial news, capable of appreciating the technical depth of the cases. Even keeping my identity protected, I published anonymous articles and interviews, warning of the dangers of manipulations in inheritance contracts and their devastating consequences, broadening the debate and preparing the ground for greater pressure on the authorities. This period was also an intense internal struggle. The battle I was waging had a heavy emotional cost. The weight of responsibility, the fear of failure, the sleepless nights, all of this tried to undermine my resilience. But the will to protect my family's history and ensure justice was stronger than any exhaustion. I silently repeated, "Contracts may be broken, but justice has a long memory," a mantra that became my shield and the driving force to continue. Knowing the imminence of the confrontation, I also devised a strategy to formally notify Charles, sending him a precise, direct, and legally unquestionable document. Every word of that warning was designed to be an irrevocable blow, leaving no room for emotional disputes or attempts at manipulation. It was a warning that I would not back down, that the legal battle was declared, and that the truth, supported by concrete evidence, could not be swept under the rug. I anticipated that the clash would not only be in the legal arena. Charles would try to use the old tactic of emotional manipulation, exploiting the family image to divert attention from the seriousness of the accusations. Fernanda would rely on seduction and irony to disarm, while Julia would exert all her coldness and provocation to intimidate. But I was prepared. My weapon would be precise reason, the order of facts, and the weight of the evidence. With the dossier ready and the plan of action established, I felt a mixture of relief and strength. The path traveled to that point, marked by each meticulously constructed detail, gave me unprecedented security. I knew that finally, I could reverse that story of betrayal and reveal the truth hidden under artifice and ulterior motives. I took a deep breath, aware that justice, with its slow but powerful march, would not forget what I was now beginning to write in indelible ink. It was time for the truth. The click of the door closing behind me that afternoon was engraved in my memory as the irrevocable beginning of a battle that would transcend personal spheres to become a judicial and moral clash. I handed the envelope to the secretary of the Bar Association, a formal notification that laid out, with surgical precision, the evidence gathered against Charles Carter. This correspondence wasn't a mere threat. It was the opening gambit in a strategic chess game designed to unravel and destroy a system of fraud that had insidiously infiltrated our own family, shielded by legal loopholes and conspiratorial alliances. In the days that followed, silence was Charles's only response, a silence that spoke volumes. In the few remaining family gatherings, I felt his eyes avoid mine with almost palpable unease. Fernanda, always impeccably dressed, oscillated between strained smiles and abrupt withdrawals, her posture betraying the tension and discomfort of someone feeling the ground crumble beneath their feet. Julia, the enigmatic lawyer, remained impassive, but I sensed in her small gestures that she understood the profound shock caused by my accusation. The atmosphere was tense, heavy with a somber energy that reinforced the importance and impact of my initiative. The hearing that would solidify the legal confrontation took place weeks later in a stark courtroom, where the echoes of voices reverberated with gravity, seeming to amplify the weight of every word spoken. There, among judges, lawyers, and witnesses, my voice rose with a serene and implacable conviction. I presented the dossier I had prepared, a meticulous mosaic composed of forged documents, digital forensics reports, testimony from confidential sources, and rigorous legal analyses. Each piece of this material dismantled, piece by piece, the cunning scheme devised by Charles and his allies to usurp the family inheritance. Charles attempted to employ his old tactics of charm and manipulation, projecting a confident smile and articulating words that sought to minimize the facts, transform accusations into assumptions, and deflect attention to emotional dynamics. But faced with the invincible solidity of the evidence presented, his voice lost strength, his posture faltered, and his eyes betrayed for the first time a fear impossible to mask. It was at that moment that the unwavering truth became clear. His arrogance and hauteur, which had previously given him an air of invulnerability, were in fact his weakness. Fernanda adopted a different strategy, using seduction and irony as her weapons. Her strained smile sought to appeal to the emotions of those present, attempting to create empathy and deflect critical scrutiny. However, the overwhelming amount of evidence directly linking her to the fraudulent scheme neutralized any attempt to mitigate her responsibility. The mask fell, exposing her true intentions and complicity in the illegal operations. Julia, who usually projected an almost unbeatable coldness, found herself cornered by the precision of the evidence and the coherence of the arguments. Her attempts to use legal complexity and technicalities to confuse the proceedings were thwarted by my rigorous preparation. Every detail of the dossier had been anticipated, ready to neutralize evasive maneuvers and fallacious arguments. Julia's arrogance, so present in the past, became her greatest enemy in that courtroom, culminating in a silent and inevitable collapse. The hearing transcended mere judicial formality to reveal a true silent war, a battle between truth and lies, between justice and impunity. I was the bearer of truth, the warrior emerging from adversity, strengthened by reason, patience, and the inexorable technique of the law. In the days following the hearing, the repercussions of the case took unexpected proportions, fueled by a discreet network of specialized journalists who perceived the impact and complexity of the scandal. Without exposing details that could harm the legal proceedings, this network fostered public debates about the legal vulnerabilities that facilitate fraud in inheritance contracts, bringing the issue to the forefront. The news that members of the traditional Carter family were involved in a fraudulent scheme subjected them to increasing social and legal scrutiny. Amidst this whirlwind, I took on the role of interlocutor for the hidden victims of the scheme, family members, estate employees, and even affected third parties who were unaware of the depth of the theft. It was a process that gave me the opportunity to share pain, strengthen bonds, and cultivate a renewed sense of collective responsibility. The cause transcended my personal grievance, taking on a dimension of a fight for social justice, professional ethics, and respect for the legacies and rights bequeathed by our ancestors. Nevertheless, I maintained an ironclad discipline to preserve my emotional balance. The temptations of resentment and revenge, so natural in the face of such betrayal, were carefully avoided. I knew that victory would come through the rigor of the law, through the irrefutable argument of the facts, and not through visible passions. This serenity, even if acquired by force, became a powerful tool, capable of garnering the respect of even those who saw me as an adversary. In parallel, I began dedicated work to raise awareness among women and families about the frequent and silent risks surrounding inheritance contracts, a complex universe often neglected even by legal professionals. At the invitation of various associations, I participated in lectures, seminars, and conferences, spaces where I could share my experience, warn about fraud, and emphasize the importance of knowledge, vigilance, and qualified legal counsel. Each account I heard, each shared story of injustice, spurred me to amplify my voice and reinforce my commitment. I did not want other people to experience the anguish of the silent blow, the loss hidden by legal complexities. My message highlighted the transformative power of carefully reading documents, the value of technical preparation, and the inalienable right to fight against injustice. In the silence of my deepest moments, I reflected on the meaning of the path I had traveled. Written in history was more than a sketched theme. It was the exact metaphor for the battle I was waging to preserve memory, truth, and justice. And the true inheritance, I learned, lay not in the land, houses, or material fortune, but in the justice preserved for future generations. Deep down, I whispered to myself, the weight of each step heavy. True inheritance is justice. Words that would echo, a silent legacy, far beyond the conclusion of my case. The biggest battle was reaching its climax, but the essential mission, to be a guardian of justice, an inspiration to other silenced voices, was only just beginning. I still remember the moment I finally accessed the forged digital signature in my name. A cold wave washed over me. It wasn't just the legal act itself, but the calculated audacity of someone who dared to manipulate my identity without the slightest shame. That was the decisive click that propelled me to devise an infallible plan, based on a meticulous analysis of the evidence I gathered. Altered contracts, emails devoid of explanation, and veiled testimonies from discreet allies. From that moment on, I outlined a strategic path to dismantle the criminal scheme with the precision of someone who understands every comma of legal texts and knows how to disarm every invisible trap. I understood that it wasn't enough to simply expose the error. I needed to build a legal fortress, an undeniable dossier that would guarantee the security of justice in the face of the forger's interests. I began by compiling a protected digital archive, where I organized each document with rigorous chronology, cross-referencing dates, signatures, registry records, comparing digital metadata, protocols, and even internal information obtained from discrete sources. Each element was carefully reviewed, adjusted, and explained under the critical eye of my experience, ensuring the technical solidity capable of withstanding any forced challenge. To amplify the strength of this denunciation, I didn't work in isolation. I extended my network to digital forensics experts and fellow lawyers who, after notification and indiscretion, assisted me in the in-depth analysis of the files, identifying irregularities almost imperceptible to untrained eyes. These collaborations gave the material even more robustness, adding technical knowledge to my legal expertise. A crucial point of the plan was the strategic use of the specialized press, not to spread rumors or sensationalism, but to alert the legal community and society to the silent dangers of inheritance fraud. I wrote anonymous articles and participated in discreet forums, guided by the awareness that the force of truth multiplies when illuminated in the public sphere. I also knew that the enemy would react. Charles, Fernanda, and Julia were not strangers to emotional and legal manipulation. Therefore, I prepared myself for the main confrontation with absolute composure and coolness. I anticipated that their defenses would use family history and privileged information to try to destabilize the accusation. My responses were preemptive. The objectivity of the law, the sharp technique of the jurist, and the evidentiary arsenal that would leave no room for doubt. No step was taken without assessing the risk. Every move was measured to avoid exposing vulnerabilities. The official notification sent to Charles was sent through formal channels, guaranteeing proof of delivery and acknowledgement, blocking attempts at omission or contempt. The text of the document was designed to be unequivocal, and the demonstration of my conviction remained crystal clear. The days following the delivery of the notification were indeed ones of silent but attentive observation. I noticed tension building among the family members, visible in suspicious glances and whispered conversations. It was clear that my actions were having an impact, and that the ground for my next stage was being consolidated. When the time for the hearing arrived, every detail of the dossier was presented with firmness and clarity, in the hearing where justice would prevail. The room, filled with voices, gazes, and tensions, transformed into the stage for a clash where vigorous facts confronted decades of silent betrayals. Charles tried to shield himself with the old emotional ploy of family ties, attempting to discredit the accusation with rehearsed words and calculated smiles. Fernanda employed her silent irony, trying to disarm any doubt against them. Julia, with her arrogance-fueled confidence, sought to divert attention to legal details and minor technical nuances. However, my response was the serenity of implacable reason. I presented each fragment of the dossier with surgical precision, unraveling the arguments with legible facts and digital evidence that exposed every lie. The hearing became the scene where the coolness of legal technique found its highest application, nullifying empty rhetoric and manipulative maneuvers. The trial was not just a legal process. It was a silent victory of truth against hidden interests and concealed strategies. My balanced and focused demeanor earned unexpected respect even among opponents, demonstrating the power of knowledge combined with ethics. After the decision, the weight of responsibility became even clearer. My struggle had transformed, from a personal case, into a banner for many who suffer from inheritance fraud. Injustice, I realized, was an evil that transcends families and directly affects the social fabric. I then dedicated myself to a new mission, lending my voice to meetings, support groups, and legal conferences. The lessons learned became teachings for women and men, victims of manipulations concealed by legal documents. I warned that, to capture the power of the law, it was necessary to pay attention to every word and sign, and not to fear the confrontation. Finally, I smiled softly, thinking that I was writing a new page in history, one that would not be marked by betrayal, but by justice served. And more than anything, I knew that the true inheritance, the one that leaves lasting marks, was not in papers or land, but in the courage to defend what is right. True inheritance is justice. I repeat this silent phrase, my reward and legacy, as I see the light of a new era. The echo of the sentence that marked my victory still resonated within me as reality began to transform. That courtroom, with its heavy silence, was the field where my determination and tactical preparation materialized into concrete justice. But the battle didn't end there. It expanded, taking shape in the routine that would follow, in the decisions I would now have to make. Charles was removed from the administration of the family estate, and the process of recovering the assets began rigorously. I saw the fruits of my labor become tangible when the falsified documents were invalidated and the records corrected, righting the historical injustices that should have been preserved. The feeling of accomplishment mingled with the sobriety of someone who knows that the true struggle is a daily one. Fernanda and Julia retreated, not only from the courts but also from public life. Their names now carried a shadow, and what once seemed invincible crumbled under the weight of the truth. Resistance remained, behind closed doors and in restrained gestures, but the tide had irrevocably turned. Justice continued its march, slow but relentless. I, in turn, felt the responsibility grow. More than defending my own history, there was now a mission: to be an active voice for those who, like me, faced legal traps and silent future losses. I remembered the hopeful eyes of the women at the conferences, the moving stories we shared, and the urgency of amplifying this narrative. I decided to found a specialized legal support center focused on women victims of fraud in inheritance contracts, and other complex family law situations. The idea was to create an accessible network of knowledge where they could find technical guidance grounded in experience and ethical commitment. The challenge was great, but the cause filled me with renewed energy. The center's meetings brought together not only lawyers but also psychologists and social workers. I understood that the pain of injustice carried impacts that transcended the legal sphere. There were stories of hidden betrayals, unspoken fears, and an emptiness that only the hope of redress could fill. Being part of this reconstruction was more than justice. It was humanity in action. While expanding this mission, I maintained my commitment to my profession and studies. I participated in academic events, published articles and legal briefs, and maintained an active connection with social movements fighting for equitable access to justice. It was a constant process of learning and sharing, where practical experience fed the theory and vice versa. Gradually, I rediscovered a personal serenity that, despite the harshness of the journey, proved resilient. I learned that justice, to be complete, must be persistent and compassionate, and that the word of a jurist carries a weight far greater than documents or rules. It carries the hope of those who depend on their struggle. In one of these moments of reflection, sitting on my porch, I looked out at the horizon and let the phrase that had accompanied me from the beginning echo again within me. Contracts may be broken, but justice has a long memory. It was more than a professional motto. It was the moral compass guiding my path. Closing my eyes, I smiled with the quiet certainty of someone who knows that, although the past was marked by betrayal, the future I am writing now is founded on real and lasting justice. And that, for me, is the true victory. A legacy that transcends material possessions. A living testament to courage and integrity. The fight continues,